For nearly a century, people who watched spiders work since the web broke a rule of physics, and only in 2012 did a lab quietly prove them right. Stay with me. The reason a fly stays caught instead of springing free is hidden in a single thread, and once you see how it moves, you cannot unsee it. Picture a beetle, heavy and fast, flying straight into a garden spider's web at full speed. By every rule of motion you were taught, that web should behave like a trampoline, store the energy of the impact, and throw the insect back into the air. A taut, springy net catches a ball and returns it. The web is taut. The silk is springy. The beetle should bounce. It doesn't. It stops dead, sinks into the mesh, and stays. That single failure to bounce is the whole case. For decades it was filed under "the web is just sticky," as if glue alone could explain why a fast, struggling insect surrenders its motion so completely. Glue is part of it. It is not the answer. The answer is in how the thread itself behaves the instant it is loaded, a behavior engineers would later borrow for cables and tethers. The first careful records came from high-speed cameras pointed at ordinary orb-weavers, the common garden spider, Araneus diadematus, the one strung across your back door on an autumn morning. Slow the film, frame by frame, and the moment of impact stops being invisible. An insect arrives carrying real energy. The web bulges inward like a catcher's mitt. The threads stretch deep, and then the whole mesh settles. No rebound. The prey is simply absorbed. Researchers measuring this noticed what the eye misses at normal speed. The web does not snap back. A trampoline returns roughly what it takes. This surface kept almost everything. The energy of the strike went somewhere, and it did not go back into the insect. Naturalists had described the effect in words for generations, flies that hit and held, but words are easy to dismiss. Film is not. The footage showed a taut, elastic structure behaving like the opposite of elastic at the exact instant it mattered. And what happens by the end of this case is the part no one expects. The same silk that swallows a beetle would be pulled into engineering labs and tested as a model for steel cables. First, though, the obvious objection had to be dealt with. Surely, the skeptics said, this is just glue. Glue was the easy answer, and for a long time the only one on the table. The capture spiral, the sticky thread an orb-weaver lays down last, is coated in tiny beads of a watery, gluey substance, a viscid silk that catches the light like a string of dew. Touch it, and it clings. So the reasoning went, the insect sticks, it struggles, it tires, and the web holds it the way flypaper holds a fly. Clean, simple, and wrong in the part that matters. Glue explains why a stationary insect can't peel itself off. It does not explain the impact. A beetle hitting a web at speed carries enough energy to tear straight through a passive sticky net, or to bounce off before the glue ever grabs. Stickiness is a slow force. The collision is over in a few thousandths of a second. Something had to kill the insect's motion in that first instant, before glue could do anything at all. Skeptics also blamed the frame. Maybe the anchor lines soaked up the shock. But the anchors alone cannot account for it. Every easy explanation handled the aftermath and ignored the collision. The real question was narrower and harder. What does a single strand of capture silk actually do in the first millisecond of a strike? When someone finally measured it, the curve made no sense at first. Spider silk breaks a rule almost every other material obeys when stretched. Pull on steel, on rubber, on a nylon line, and each responds in a steady, predictable way until it fails. In 2012, a team led by an engineer at MIT put real spider silk under precise tension and recorded its full stretch and stress response, and the curve had a kink that did not belong. At first, the thread resisted, growing stiffer as it was pulled, exactly what a good net should do. Then, past a certain point of strain, it did the opposite. It softened. The thread yielded and flowed instead of fighting, and in that softening it swallowed the energy of the load rather than storing it to throw back. That is the shock absorber. A purely stiff response would bounce the insect off. A purely soft one would let it punch through. Silk does both in sequence: stiff to catch, soft to absorb, stiff again at the very end so the thread does not simply snap. The numbers show how far it goes. A spider's strongest dragline stretches only about 30% before failing. The sticky capture silk can stretch more than 200%. The same softening is why a web tears in only one place instead of unzipping all at once. The thing they had called sticky was, underneath, an engineered-grade break. Confirmation came from a different direction, not a tension machine, but cameras aimed at real prey hitting real webs. A separate group filmed orb-weaver webs as insects struck them, recording at more than 10,000 frames a second, fast enough to freeze a single millisecond of contact. When they added up the energy before and after each strike, the books balanced in a way the glue theory never could. The insect's motion vanished into the web almost entirely, and only a sliver came back. The silk wasn't doing it alone. As the threads whipped through the air itself dragged on them and bled off energy, an aerodynamic breaking a stiff, dry net would never get. The web is tuned to its medium, using the silk's softening and the resistance of the air together. Two breaks in the same instant. Different lab, different method, same verdict. The strike is absorbed, not reflected. Molecular models told the same story from below, simulating how the protein chains inside one thread unfold and slide past each other to dissipate a load. 3 independent angles, a tension test, high-speed impact footage, and a simulation pointed at one conclusion. The web is not a passive trap. It is an active energy management system built of protein. And that is when the engineers started taking notes. Spider silk is, ounce for ounce, tougher than steel, and engineers noticed. Inside materials science, the consensus now is quiet but firm. The orb web is one of the best impact absorbers in nature, and the trick is that stiffen then soften behavior, not the glue. The silk is nearly 10 times as tough as steel, not stronger, tougher, meaning it absorbs far more energy before it fails. That is exactly the property you want in a safety cable, a tether, or a line meant to arrest something heavy moving fast. Researchers have studied silk as a blueprint for cables that catch loads without snapping back, for tougher tethers, even for the kind of arresting lines that stop aircraft. The appeal is the controlled failure. A silk-inspired structure could be designed to soften under a sudden shock, soak up the blow, and tear in one spot instead of failing all at once. Labs have spun artificial silk fibers and built the same nonlinear response into other materials. The web in your garden turns out to be a solved engineering problem, one spider solved first by roughly 400 million years. The public still pictures a web as flypaper. The field knows it is closer to a shock absorber you could bolt onto a bridge. And there is still one part of it no one has fully reproduced. No one has yet built a fiber that does everything spider silk does at once. As strong, as stretchy, as tough, and spun from water at room temperature by an animal with a brain the size of a grain of salt. We can describe the web's trick now. We still cannot quite make it. And the spider has been doing it, without a single revision, since before the dinosaurs.